Hi, everybody. My name is Sam Berkow from SIA Acoustics, a division of RDA, and I'm here with the founder of RealAcoustix, Richard Lenz. And we're sitting here at Vic's Jazz Bar in Las Vegas, Nevada. And what you can't see is that there are other diffusers above us and some bass absorbers as well, hanging in a three fabric covered ceiling clads.
Right.
So let's start with a simple definition: scattering versus diffusion.
Well, I always go back to the beginnings. And the beginning of diffusion was Manfred Schroeder in 1975. And Dr. Schroeder defined what we now refer to as a product of diffusion. Diffusion is actually a process, but as a diffuser, the idea was to create something that diffused very quickly. Everything diffuses eventually. As sound waves travel through the air and they bombard one another, it becomes diffuse. But his concept was, and he was a big fan of classical music, and so he wanted to find a way to make your typical classical hall, a shoebox style, not so just reflective as they normally are, but he wanted diffusive ceiling. And so this was a pet project for him. He was working for Bell Labs. What did he care about? It wasn't part of his work. This was a lark for him, and he got a few other acousticians involved as well. But the concept behind diffusion and scattering and I love Schroeder's definition of scattering. His definition is scattering is the pattern of the reflection. Doesn't matter what reflection it is. It could be off of a wall. How does that wall look when it reflects? That to him is scattering. So when I started RealAcoustix 16 years ago, I decided I did not want to confuse the terms diffusion and scattering, because they've been misused a lot over the last 40 years or so. And so if a product does not really diffuse within, my opinion, 3 feet of the panel, it's a scatterer. And we look a lot of people say, well, I've created this product, or we have this product that's an extruded QRD. And by that, one's with building blocks, looks like a bunch of building blocks. That's not really a diffuser, because what that does is scatters. It does, and if it's designed well, they can do it well. It can be a nice 360-degree hemispherical, design, but it's not diffuse. It's a single reflection. The diffuser has multiple reflections to it, as in the quadratics you see behind you, and other quadratics that we make and other people make. And so that's really what you have to look at, is scattering is the pattern of a reflection.
I like to think of scattering as using irregular shapes, whether they're triangles, pyramids, hemispherical diffuser
Sure.
scatterers, that basically change the direction of a reflection. And they spread it out a bit, but it's not a uniform diffuse field over a given frequency range. You're just breaking up the wave.
Right.
With a diffuser, the energy comes in, and the diffuser shifts the phase by a series of wells to create the maximum amount of diffusive angle, if you will.
Right.
The largest angle for that frequency range that you can. So you reduce the specular reflection the most, and you create the most uniform diffuse field possible.
Right. Now, and obviously one of the advantages of a quadratic residue diffuser, and not necessarily with primary root or and stuff like that, we're really going to be talking about quadratics here, is that it has a very defined pattern that comes out. And really, the big advantage, and a lot of people try to describe what a diffuser does, and it's I've been listening to this for literally 30 years, and well, it just kind of changes the sound of the room, and it does, and it feels bigger. That's always the thing you hear: feels bigger. Well, the reason it feels bigger is because it's not just one. If you put an impulse response, a single impulse response, into a quadratic, you will get a minimum. If it's a decent quadratic, you'll get a minimum of 8 reflections back. And they're usually spaced by 1 to 2 milliseconds. And that's the brilliance of it, is that, and we have these simulations now. We've done particle simulations where we can show that, and we'll show that. And it really now allows us to see what a diffuser is actually doing. It also helps us show the pattern of a diffuser. So if you look at, like, these back here are one-dimensional diffusers, and we talk about one-dimensional and two-dimensional, and it's a hemispherical pattern, but there's very little vertical energy to it at all.
In a one-dimensional.
In a one-dimensional, it all comes right back, which means that it's focused. The more focused that energy is, the better it is, and the more phase mixed it is. Now a lot of people aren't going to really understand phase all that well, but think of it, most audio guys will understand phase when you talk about a subwoofer, two subwoofers and one's out of phase. If it's 180 degrees out of phase, they cancel each other.
Right. That's out of polarity.
That's, yeah.
180 degrees phase shift is a polarity shift.
Yeah,
whether people say it is or not.
Yeah.
It effectively is.
But when you talk about a diffuser, I mean, we're talking about shifts of 1 degree, 2 degrees, not anything the ear can actually make out. The human ear can't really define it. I always use the concept of diffusion the same way I would listen, I would be listening to a recording. If I'm listening to a 16-bit 48K CD, and then I walk into the studio and I listen to a 192, okay, all of a sudden it's like I can no longer hear dithering, and we shouldn't be able to hear dithering, but we do.
You can.
I don't hear it anymore with 192 because it's so refined, and it's the same thing with the diffuser. The phase mixing is so refined, it comes back at you, and by the way, it comes back in a coherent fashion. That's really important to note, because a regular wall, frequencies will bounce off based on their frequency range, whatever the length is of that waveform. Whereas with the diffuser, that doesn't happen. It all comes back in one uniform, and that's brilliant. I mean, it's really brilliant.
And there you have it.